The only words I understood on the whole thing was malignant carcinoma. I couldn't even say the word cancer out loud. It took me about 2 weeks to be able to say that word without crying.
Hi, and welcome again to Inside Out. There's so many things in life that we take for granted, and we don't really appreciate them until there's a possibility that they're not going to be there anymore. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce my guest for today, Rebecca Murray. Rebecca, hi, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, it's great to be here, John.
So Rebecca, you're an edutainer, you're an author of a child's book, you're a producer with multimedia, and you're a survivor, right?
Right, yeah.
So,
most recently added to my resume.
So one day turned out to be different to any other day. What happened?
Yeah, well, I'd like to go back maybe to the very beginning, and one of the things that we had talked about discussing here is body image, and certainly dealing with breast cancer makes one reflect a great deal on how important are breasts to my identity, and maybe very important, maybe not important at all, and deciding whether to keep them or let them go, which is a decision that I had to make. And it brought me back to my childhood in remembering how much I wanted breasts. As a little girl, starting at about the age of 7, 8, 9, when I used to run down the hall and find a big health encyclopedia and open it up to the pages that showed what happens to the transition between girl to woman in terms of, puberty, breasts, body, hair, pubic hair, all those sorts of things. And I would stare at these pictures and think, well, that's what's going to happen to me. And then, of course, all of the commercials, Playtex Cross Your Heart bras. You don't have flat-chested women on bra commercials. So I expected Marilyn Monroe breasts. And then the third influence really was my father leaving pornography around the house and taking a look at these, huge breasts that these women, the Playboy centerfold. My mother did eventually train him not to do that, but the influence was already made in my head. And so I fully expected to have big, beautiful breasts when I grew up. Couldn't wait to get my first training bra. And that's the bra that basically I sort of kept in my entire life because they never grew beyond size A.
And the world of advertising and media pretty much made out that breasts were collateral. Absolutely collateral. And when I realized that that wasn't going to be part of my collateral, I sort of shifted gears. And it was always in my mind, I would shop for certain types of clothes that didn't have plunging necklines, more necklines that came up here. If somebody happened to give me something that had a lower neckline, I'd get safety pins and pin it together. Bras were always a problem because I never filled out anything. So I basically, when jog bras finally came on the market, that was sort of, what I went with. And so was that a significant issue for you at that time, I guess post-puberty when you...
When I realized at the age of 14 that these weren't coming in like they were for other girls, and I also took note of the girls that got the most attention from boys at that age were the big-breasted girls. So I mentally had to decide to go in a different direction, and that direction was to become an athlete, a runner. And certainly breasts are not needed to be a fast runner. In fact, big breasts can be a hindrance. So I, as an athlete, I stayed svelte and was almost flat-chested during those years, had very little body fat, and sort of embraced that image of myself and let the whole breasts thing go.
Great. And as you went on in life, it just became less and less of an issue till it became an issue, I guess.
Right. Well, I married a man who I'm very fortunate to have met and married a man who is fine with me exactly as I am.
big breasts, small breasts, no breasts, it really doesn't matter to him. What matters is me on the inside, and that I'm happy with me. And so that is truly a blessing, and has been a blessing through this breast cancer journey as well. Yeah.
So would you say that your experiences as a child, or going through puberty and that, and the way you dealt with that in a way kind of armed you for the way you were going to handle the actual process of going through mastectomy?
It definitely did, because what I realized is I don't have a strong association with my breasts, because they really weren't part of my identity. They were there, but I realized, like the night before I went in to have my double mastectomy, I stood in front of the mirror. As I moved into it and started sharing what was going on with me, I had a lot of women come forward and give me advice on all sorts of things, wonderful, wonderful advice. And one of them said, take a picture of yourself without any clothes on from the waist up before your surgery, so that you always have that. And I realized as I was standing in front of the mirror, because you have to use these cloths before you go in for surgery, these antibacterial cloths, and wash yourself from head to toe. And I stood there looking at myself in the mirror, and I realized I had never done that. I had never just focused on my breasts and taken a good hard look at them. So I did that for the first time, and turned to the side, and then turned to the other side, and I went upstairs and turned on my video camera and did that same thing. And then what I decided to do was, every week following my surgery, was to go upstairs in my studio and do the same exact thing through this horrible reconstruction phase where you just can't even imagine how terrible it all looks. Black and blue and yellow and tubes hanging out. Oh my gosh, it was quite a thing to go through, and excruciatingly painful as well. I've never experienced any pain like that in my life, which brought me quickly to being grateful that I've been so fortunate in my life not to have experienced things like that, like other people live with. They have to live with.
So going back a little bit, because we're talking about the obviously the physical aspects of it, but you were given a diagnosis that was potentially life-threatening. So
yes.
What did that bring up in your mind?
Yes, well, the whole thing about how that diagnosis happened was very interesting, because I hate mammograms, which was one of the decisions why I had a double mastectomy instead of a single, because that for me was, well, if I never have to have another mammogram, that's the icing on the cake, to just taking all the tissue. So I was having my regular mammograms, and they called me back this last time. Nothing serious, I have a hard time saying it, dense breast tissue. Because I've been an athlete, because I'm a thinner person, I have dense breast tissue. 40% of women have dense breast tissue. And guess what? You cannot identify cancer within dense breast tissue on a regular mammogram. So they're always having trouble with my mammograms. And the whole process is always, I never look forward to it. So they have me come back, which is fairly routine, and they say, well, we're going to use a different process this time because we saw something, we just want to get a closer look at it. So they take the images. While I'm sitting there, they send them back to the radiologist. The woman comes back in, the nurse comes back in, and she says, you know what? He says, just come back in 6 months. So I texted a friend of mine, my best friend from high school, who went through this 10 years ago where she lost a breast, and she says, no, you are not going to come back in 6 months. You are going to call the radiologist and you're going to demand a biopsy. And I'm like, that's overreacting, you're overreacting. But I know this friend of mine, and she's very insistent, and she would keep calling and calling and calling until I did this. So I went ahead, bit the bullet, made the phone call, asked for the biopsy. I go in the next week for a biopsy, and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be able to call my friend and say, see, I told you so, you're overreacting.
Right.
But on a Friday afternoon at 3:30, with my chart, you're familiar with that.
Sure.
It's an app. So I clicked on it. It was 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, and the only words I understood on the whole thing was malignant carcinoma. And I was absolutely certain that they got my test results mixed up with somebody else's.
So you weren't called by anybody, you just found out by looking up your app?
Yeah, from my app, right. And I didn't actually hear from anyone until Monday morning. I finally got a call from somebody. So I had all weekend to make up stories in my mind about how I was going to die. And we had our third granddaughter was about to be born. She was going to be born like 2 weeks later. And in my mind, they're having this discussion with her. She's a 5-year-old girl, and they're showing her pictures of me. This was your grandma, Reb. She was really nice. You would have liked her. Yeah, too bad that breast cancer killed her. I mean, that was, you know, where I went immediately by that evening at 8 p.m. And then I had to try. I'm like, well, this feels really bad. I'm crying. I'm hysterical. My husband's trying to comfort me, my family's on the phone, and we're all trying to figure out what this means. Of course, you know, for me, I'm already dead. So Monday morning, I get this call from I've never had like a regular doctor, because I'm so healthy, I'm so blessed that, you know, once a year I would see a gynecologist, like a family nurse practitioner type person. And so she called me and she said, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call the hospital. They have an advocate. She's going to call you. She's going to set up all of your appointments for you. So within an hour, I was on the phone with a woman, and she set up 4 appointments: an oncologist, a surgeon, the radiologist, and then they wanted me to get a regular physician. And then on top of that, I ended up with also a plastic surgeon. So I ended up with 5 doctors. Here I have 0 doctors. I went from 0 to 5 in a matter of an hour and a half. They've scheduled all the appointments for me, because I couldn't even say the word cancer out loud. It took me about 2 weeks to be able to say that word without crying. And it was through all these appointments. Now I'm in the gathering information mode, and my mother is like a mad researcher, you know, so she's researching everything. And this is a particular type of cancer, ductal carcinoma in situ, so it's in the ducts.
Right.
But they look at all these different things, like how fast growing is it? Is it estrogen positive? There's all these different markers. And it turned out that I had the most aggressive fast-growing type of this. If I didn't have an aggressive fast-growing type, I wouldn't have done anything. I wouldn't have done anything at all. I would have just waited.
Right.
So once they realized that there was some in there, then you have to do an MRI to see how much, because again, the dense breast tissue hides a lot of this.
Sure. And then MRI can actually go through the soft tissue.
Yes, gives you the contrast. It can actually give you the shape and the amount. So what the doctor, when the doctor called me, this was right after Thanksgiving, he said, it's about the size of an egg. Now I have a 3-egg breast, okay? So if I do a lumpectomy, you're taking an egg. You can't just take the egg, you have to take the egg plus.
Sure.
So basically half of my breast would be gone if I did a lumpectomy. Then I'd have to do radiation and probably not chemotherapy. And that would be a weird looking thing on my body, just little crazy blob. So I thought, well, that's not gonna work for me. Just take the whole thing. And if I take this whole thing, then you know what? You might as well take that whole thing. And so that was why I made the decision, just get rid of it all.
And earlier when we were talking, you'd mentioned Nancy Reagan's experience with that. I think that's worth sharing briefly.
Yes, yeah, well, this is fascinating. So Nancy Reagan, at age 66, and this is back in 1987, was diagnosed with, they found a lesion. And back in those days, it wasn't as easy, I guess, to do a biopsy. So what they did with her is they put her under anesthesia, and this is what she said: take the biopsy, don't wake me up, I don't want to discuss it. If it's cancerous, just go ahead and take the breast. No reconstruction. I want to get back to work. I don't want to do radiation. I don't want to do chemotherapy. I just want the tissue gone and to get on with my life, because I'm a very busy woman, first lady. And so they did that. They found the cancer. They removed her breast, and she immediately came under fire by all of these breast cancer advocates and different people in the media. You've set us back 10 years, because they were trying to get women to do lumpectomies. And it was the celebrity influence. You know, Nancy Reagan had a mastectomy, not a lumpectomy. So they saw a huge spike in women making the decision to go with a mastectomy. And of course, the celebrity influence is a real thing. Let's look at Angelina Jolie. And it affected me. So when I had to make my decision, do I build the breast back? Do I not? Do I get a crazy cool tattoo? Do I take them both off and not do anything? Sorting through all these things, because again, I'm not that attached to my breasts. So I had definitely plenty of options. I looked at which people in the media, like Angelina Jolie, which movie stars have breast cancer, many of them, and what they chose to do. And it definitely influenced me.
Yeah. And their responses, I mean, Angelina Jolie as well as Nancy Reagan were quite adamant that, you know, this is my body, this is my business.
Yes, my body, my business, exactly. Nobody's business but mine. And thank goodness we live in a country that mostly allows women, you know, supports women in making choices for their own bodies.
Yeah. So then you decided, having gone through that, having gone for, I don't know if symmetry was a consideration and all those things.
When I met with a doctor and I said, well, you know, I have this choice, I'm definitely going to do a mastectomy, so now the question is one or two, because there's nothing wrong with this one, so, you know, I'm trying to decide. And he shared with me that all the research bears out that when women have breasts that match after going through something like this, they're happier. They're happier with their bodies. And they don't come back a few years later and say, you know, I think I want this one done too. So
I guess you don't have that comparative issue as well.
Yes, right. So I went ahead and did the left one, even though there was nothing wrong with it. And as it turned out, the left one, I almost had to go in for another surgery. What they thought was happening right during the surgery was what's called nipple necrosis, where the blood flow to the nipple and the surrounding tissue, basically it's like frostbite, and the skin starts to die right away. And it was this horrible kind of dark purpley black icky color for weeks and weeks. And the plastic surgeon said, you know, we're just going to wait and see. If it turns black, we need to get you in there and cut that out. And I was thinking, like, this was my good breast, you know, and it's going to be the weird looking one without a nipple. As it turned out, I just waited, and it took 2 months, but it finally healed. But having made the decision and being at peace with it, I understood the risks before I went in, that could happen to either breast or both of them. That I could just lose the nipples altogether. And so even going through that, I thought, you know what, I'm not going to regret my decision. I lean into my decision that I've made for myself, for my body.
What stage are you at now? Where are you at?
So now we have this expanders in here, the chest expanders, which they put in right after the surgery. So the surgeon and the plastic surgeon are there side by side in the operating room for this 3.5-hour surgery. They cut me open, they start with one breast, they scoop out all of the breast tissue, and then the plastic surgeon works on this one while the surgeon works on this one. And he puts this chest expander in there. It's plastic on the bottom. It's got a plastic dome, and then sort of like a rubber top to it, and a metal shield on the bottom. They fill it up with about 150 cc's of saline, and then, you know, they sew you up. So you have these big scars underneath here, and then you have drains and all that come out within a week or so, because they're draining out all that extra fluid that your body is trying to, you know, repair itself. So then you go in after about a few weeks. Then you get these, what I call fill-ups. So Dr. Chang, my plastic surgeon, has more saline and a big plunger, and so he puts a big needle in my breast, right through that little, the rubber part. There's a metal plate right underneath it, so the needle doesn't go through and puncture the whole thing. That'd be bad, wouldn't it?
Hands are long, I guess.
He uses like a little Doppler, and the Doppler points down when it sees the metal, and that's where he knows he can put the needle in, and then he goes, and these go, and it's a little painful because what they do is they put this expander underneath the chest wall muscle. So the chest wall muscle is normally against the ribs. During the surgery, they cut and they push that chest wall muscle out. So now on the top of my breasts is actually muscle. So they're kind of hard and robust, which is why I'll have perk until I die. You know, I'm not going to sag at all. And so I'll be one of those women lying flat on my back at the pool, you know, when I'm 75, and everyone will go, boy, you know, she has got a nice rack for 75, and everyone will know it's because they're fake, right? So I have these saline things in, and then the plan is at some point to go back and have another surgery number 2. They cut me back open. They take these plastic things out and they put in silicone implants, which then would feel softer and look better.
Sure. Okay, great. So looking back on all of this, I mean, there's the physical side of it, there's the emotional side that just can't be understated. What do you walk away with?
Oh, so many good things, so many great things. You know, the big lesson is to share with others. And you know, the reason I found my cancer was because I shared with my friend. If I'd kept it to myself, I'd be waiting to go in for my next mammogram right now, right. And that cancer would be spreading in my body. So that was number 1. In terms of like my sharing with others, I know that I have encouraged women to go in for mammograms, and they have called and they said, oh my gosh, they called me back, I have to have a biopsy now. And so I've been part of that as well for others. Also, accepting help. So many people reached out to me, what can I, just tell me what I can do. I had meals brought to my family while I was incapacitated, totally incapacitated and helpless. I've learned of so many people that I know personally, and I never knew they had cancer, but they've shared that with me, their journey.
Yeah.
And they've also shared that it's given them some freedom and permission to also share it for the first time, because it's not something that women, well, people openly talk about for the most part.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, I don't want anybody to know I have cancer. Because in most of our minds, when we think cancer, we think chemotherapy, very sick, you're going to lose your hair, you're going to, you know...
Sure. And a lot of it's, you know, it's trying to shoot a mosquito with a shotgun.
Yes, right. And everyone's feeling so sorry for you. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling today? I'll probably have people asking me that question for the next year. Are you okay? Can I get you anything? And because we have these visions of what somebody with cancer should look like, right? Somebody with cancer should be sick. Not necessarily.
Sure. How you should behave.
Yeah. Especially when you're like, you get it out of your body. I'm fine.
Well, keep proving them wrong.
Yes, right. Yeah. And knowing that any of us at any point in time could hear those words, you've got cancer, and they are terrifying words. Yeah. But just like me, it doesn't have to be a terrifying experience when you have people around that can support you.
Yeah. And just being able to talk. I mean, with men, I mean, prostate cancer, which is a massive thing. But, you know, get 2 guys to talk about prostate cancer, it's a thing.
I think you should have I think that would be a good interview for you, too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming here and sharing your thoughts and experiences. I think this will be of value to a lot of people as well.
Good, I sure hope so. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure.
It's been fun.
Thanks a lot. Have fun. Yeah.